Alrighty, folks, it's 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. Today, we're going to be embarking on some new content. We're going to start kind of seeing how we can take some of the different techniques that we've learned to put everything all together into a full stack application. So the most recent piece that we learned is the database. So we want to make sure that we integrate that. So we're going to start out looking at just practicing, making sure we can get the routes correct with O1 Express Calculator. This is everything without the database. Just to review that, we're going to use that as a warm-up activity before starting to integrate the database and starting to split it into our application into these different segments so we can organize it as our application grows larger and larger. So our first activity, Express Calculator. If we look in the README, you're going to create an Express Calculator. It's just going to have one route. It's just going to have one route. And that will take in 3 parameters, an operation and 2 numbers. So there are 4 operation values which a user may use: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. In fact, let me go ahead and make sure I have that set up correctly. Give me just a second. I'll show you a solved version of that. Thought I had that ready to go. My mistake. So if you look at the unsolved version within the package.json, we just have express. You won't need to add any other dependencies as part of this. And if you look inside Express Calculator, we've already built the route for you. We have result, we have operation. We currently haven't established where operation comes from. You'll need to set that up yourself. How you handle adding, subtracting, multiplication, division, etc. All right. So if we go to localhost 8080, there was an error. Let me double check to make sure I didn't mess anything up here. All right, there is no slash route. So the only route is going to start out with, let's say, addition, and someone give me a number.
13.
13, and another one.
27.
27. And I think I spelled it wrong. Yeah, I'm supposed to say add instead of that. So add those together, and I get 40. I can say subtract, and it'll say negative 14. I can say multiply. I can say divide, etc., etc. So my URLs are going to be, I'll give you some example URLs that you can use for this. And I'll post these in Slack. These are kind of our test cases. And let's switch up the numbers a bit just to remember that. There we go. So these are the URLs. It's kind of the most indirect way of doing a calculator possible. But we want you to kind of remember the rules about routing, how all the pieces work together. So this is all going to be the result of one route. Not 4 routes, not 4 route handlers, we just have 1 route handler. And so you'll think about back to the Star Wars app and how we handled things that had potentially multiple values to help you out with that. So I'm going to go ahead and post this in class activities. We're going to start out with just 25 minutes to work on this app at the beginning. Then we'll review just to kind of get us back into the web framework of mind after we've spent a lot of time working with SQL. And then we'll progress from there. If you have questions or need to have or run into issues with SQL, let us know. We'd be more than happy to help. Good luck.
Good morning. Sorry about that. We are currently working on activity. Shoot. So chapter 13 MVC, the first express calculator. Just getting that one route with 3 parameters. Just what we've been doing. User groups shouldn't be too bad. Please let us know if you have any help or have any questions. We'd be happy to hop in and help you out.
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, let me find your group. Okay. Hi, John.
Hi, Michelle.
We are working on the first activity in chapter 13 NPC.
Okay.
Got about 20 minutes left on that. So just a couple routes. Same stuff we've been doing. Don't be afraid to reach out to us if you have any questions. Be happy to hop in there and help you out.
Sure. Thanks.
In your group. Where do you go?
All right, folks, looks like we're mostly piled back at this point. So I'm going to copy what we have. The unsolved folder, we'll put it in here as the solved version. Then let's go ahead and jump into here, run npm install, and while we're doing that, let's look at our URLs and how can we write a route handler that handles all 4 of these? What is our route going to look like? Now they're all get routes, so we can say app.get. But then what comes next?
You would use colons like to create open-ended variables.
Sure. What do we want to call these?
Operation.
Yeah. Operation, operator, something like that. It's usually pretty good. We have another slash for, let's call it the first number, and then the second number. So we have these placeholder values. Cool. Let's go ahead and copy that into our main section. And we got some extra pieces there. Now, how do I access what these are?
rec.params.operator or first number.
So we could say rec.params.operator, rec.params.first number, but let's go ahead and use t-structuring to just pull those out. And now it's a little bit easier to reference them. This is a short way of saying operator equals rec.params.operator. First number equals rec.params.first number. Just means we don't have to type as much in the future. We're just pulling those values out of the object is the way I like to think of it, and giving them variable names. Next, based off of the operation, let's actually take Omar's advice earlier of changing this to be operation. We want to make sure those all match. We're based off of what that is, we're going to do different things. So the result in this case, let's change this to be let, because we're using const where possible. Just fix that up. So the result is going to be what?
Gonna be
First number
your
plus second number.
Number plus the second number. And then we're going to return the result. Let's try it out. So I'm going to go ahead and start this one. The address is already in use somewhere on my machine.
Do you need to parse the values?
You do. So we're about to see that though. Let's see. Rather than just looking for that, let's say kill. Much better. All right. So we'll say localhost 8080 slash add slash 3 slash 4, and it gives me 34. And like Daniel was saying, that's because we need to parse int these. Now the other operations would actually work because there's no valid way to multiply a string in JavaScript. But a good thing to do might be to be like, hey, let's change these over. And so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to say, let's go ahead and parse int each one of these. Or we could do that higher up. This is fine. Now for each one of these, we're just going to change the operation that gets done in here. If I was actually writing this, I'd probably write a slash route that says, hey, welcome, here's what you probably meant to do, and then redirect them to the other ones. But let's make sure that it works with other numbers as well. So there's 7. Let's pick some slightly bigger numbers, like 38 and 42. So that gives us 80. If I change that to be subtract, I get -4. If I multiply the two together, I get 1,596. And if I divide, I'll get some number slightly less than 1. Cool. Questions? All right, let's go ahead and just push this one up for y'all. Let me make. Cool. So now it should be pushed up and you should be ready to go there. Next, I want to look at an application that takes this structure, the browser, the server, and then is also going to add in the database. So let's go ahead and open up my SQL Workbench. We're going to be working in this list of magical schools. These are going to be from the Harry Potter universe. And you can see here we have a schema.sql file. And in there, we have both of our schema and a couple of different seed values. So let's go ahead and copy this into the workbench. And run it. So it's all there. Excellent. The next thing that we need to do is make sure we've got everything installed. And then inside of magicalschools.js, let's see what's going on. So we've got Express, we've got MySQL, we create our Express server, we have it listening on port 8080. Also, it's going to connect to a database. If this was deployed, that database would be hosted on a different physical server. On our development copy, it's going to be the same local version machine, but we're not going to rely on the fact that they're on the same machine. We could think of them distinctly as two separate ones. And you'll notice that they're communicating on two different ports. When the Express web server is communicating with the database server, it uses port 3306. When our browser is communicating with our web server, it uses 8080. So those are two different channels, two sets of mailboxes, and they're used for different programs communicating with each other. So we connect to MySQL, and then we have a couple of different routes. Well, really just one. We have the / route, and then we listen to it. So in here, you'll see that we just make a command, select star from schools, and now we're going to just handcraft some HTML in response. Later, we're going to see some better ways of doing this. This is kind of a painful way to build HTML, but the idea is, hey, we're going to construct a response based off of all the data that you give to us, and then we send back that HTML. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. Let's see.
You need to put your password in.
That's right. Let's go ahead and add that in there. DB password, the most secure database password there is. Not quite as good as 12345, but you know, it's close. Cool, let's go revisit localhost 8080, again, just on the / route. And we can say, hey, here's our list of items. And it got all that HTML sent back to us by the server who built that HTML for us. In fact, if I go ahead and I insert into schools, I forget the name of the school in the Magic School Bus. I'm sure that's a crossover waiting to happen. I want to say it's like Parkerville Elementary, but I could be wrong. Let's just go ahead. We run this. It's now in our database. In fact, if we say select star from schools, we can verify using the workbench that it's there in our database. And now if we come back here, refresh the page, we can see it's there as well. So it's a live connection all the way through. It just dynamically builds the HTML for us in this particular case. Cool. Any questions so far? All we're doing is, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we're using the loop. Could you just map from the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You could say, and in fact, we'll see that when we talk about render functions. This is just a way to do it. There are cleaner ways to do that, but you could absolutely use map here.
Sweet.
And we'll see some of those cleaner ways. This just might be like, hey, I'm going to try it out. Let me just see if I can do it. And you might just put that in there directly to start out with. But you could try improving on that. So next, we're going to have a Seinfeld app. Let me go ahead and show you what that is going to end up looking like. So I just need to make sure I have that running. Give me just a moment. We'll stop that server. Alrighty. Sorry that took so long. So localhost 8080 is going to have a couple of different ones looking at here. You don't have to use Seinfeld, but you can use someone else. Let's look at the 3 routes. We start out with /cast, and we can see a number of the actors or characters on there. In fact, it looks like I added them in there a couple bit of times, but that's all right. So we've got Jerry, who's got coolness points of 90. He's got an attitude of relaxed. Elaine, coolness points of 80, attitude of righteous. Kramer has coolness points of 20, attitude doofus. George has coolness points of 70, attitude of selfish, and then it turns out I added them in an extra time or 2. Whoops. Well, let's look at some of the other ones on here. So next we have coolness chart. So let's just take that. So coolness chart, and you can see that this changes up the order. So we've got ID 1 and 5 for Jerry, who's up at the top, 2 and 6 for Elaine, 4 and 8, and you'll notice that the coolness points is just gradually going down. What would be the SQL query for this? Or what would be the SQL
Order
command?
descending?
Yeah, we would order by their coolness descending, starting with the big number going down. Next, we have an attitude chart and then specifically an attitude. So let's pick one with a specific attitude. So we'll say attitude chart. And let's say relaxed. And we see Jerry on there. This is where we would use what type of clause, what type of command to a SQL, as opposed to what we saw last time.
Where attitude equals relaxed?
Yeah, where attitude equals relaxed. So what we want you to do, you can use the magical schools as kind of a blueprint for what to do. We want you to build an app. So you'll need to start out making a schema.sql that that has all of the relevant information. You're going to then need to start with some of the magic schools. You can copy a lot of what's going on here, but you're going to need to make 3 different routes. One is going to be for just, hey, here's the cast. One is going to be the cast in order of coolness. And then one is going to be members of the cast who happen to have this attitude. Now, when you're doing that, you don't have to choose Seinfeld. You could choose your own show as well. If you do, go ahead, post some screenshots of your working example. If you're able to finish it in time, we're going to work on this for the next 25 minutes. Feel free to sort of use magical schools as a starter, like copy over the unsolved or that into like a new unsolved folder, and progress from there if you want. And then we'll look at how we could make this a little bit easier with server templating. Feel free to render the HTML however you want. You can use map or anything else, but we'll be looking at some ways that we can help with that functionality in our next exercise. All right. That said, good luck. We'll see you in 25 minutes. Alrighty, folks, looks like we're mostly back here at this point. Now, we're going to make a database SQL file as the first thing that we worked on. What show do we want to use?
The Office.
All right, so we'll make it the Office DB. And then we'll say, go ahead and use it. If we were being extra careful, we could also say drop database if it exists, etc. Now, we need to create a table of characters. Let's go ahead and what things are we going to need to keep track of here?
Int, int,
D.
auto increment, not null.
Then we'll throw primary key up there as well. Next, we have their name, which will be what type?
Varchar.
just say 30. We'll again make that mandatory. In fact, we'll make all these fields mandatory. Next will be how cool they are. Which will again be an integer. And then their attitude. With this. Excellent. Let's go ahead and insert some people into this table. So insert into actors.
Should it be characters?
Sorry, characters. I'm going off of the previous one. So let's go each one of our fields, like name, coolness points, and attitude. Let's go ahead and insert some different characters. Who should we start out with?
Mike Scott.
Michael Scott. I'm just going to go with first names because I know that I have a hard time spelling some of the last names in the office. So we'll just start out with Michael. How cool is Michael?
Are we going 1 to 10?
Let's go 0 to 100.
50.
50. Attitude. What would we characterize Michael's attitude as? I would say bravado is definitely within the Michael Scott wheelhouse. Let's go ahead and add in 3 more characters. So who else?
Jim.
We've got Jim. Is Jim cooler or not as cool as Michael?
He's cooler. I'd say like an 85.
An 85. And what would we characterize Jim's attitude as?
I don't know. He does a lot of pranks at work. He doesn't really seem to care that much about his job. So
A Joker.
Joker, all right. All right, 2 more. So after Jim, who else?
Dwight.
Just going to say intense. How cool is Dwight? Is he cooler than Michael?
100.
Cooler than Jim? Less than Michael? Between the two?
Did Omar say 100?
100.
100. All right, he is very, very cool. I think Dwight made this database. Who else?
Kevin.
All right, we'll put in Kevin. How cool is Kevin?
Kevin's 110.
110, dang. What's Kevin's attitude?
Is chili an attitude?
Chill.
Not like no, like the food.
Sure. Why not?
I like that.
All right. So let's run this in our workbench. Make sure that excellent. So now our database is there. Let's select star from characters. So let's run that. And we get each one of those characters. Cool. So what I have done is I have gotten some of the boilerplate out of the way. So our database here will be characters. My username and password are pretty much, that's the table name. We need the office DB for my database. And now I need to build some different routes. So we'll have app.get / which I'm just going to add in here. And it's not going to do much. It's just going to send back nothing. In this case, it's just going to say res.send. All right, we'll need res.send. Welcome to the office DB. We'll do this again for the cast. For our other ones, which included the coolness chart, and then another one for our attitude chart. Then attitude. Now, in order to get my cast members, we're just going to kind of use the same query I had before, select star from characters. So let's go ahead and put that in here. Connection.query, and then it's just kind of hard-coded in there. No extra information needed. Except we're going to want to build a list of these different characters. So let's say res.send, and then build up a little bit of a response. So we'll say we're going to actually build in, yeah, let's do it that way. We'll do it this way. So HTML, open and closing tags. We'll make sure that we put this in the body. And then we want to do something for each one of our different characters. So we'll have a UL, no particular order to these people. And then we should put in here an LI for each one of our characters. In fact, let's go ahead and rename this to make it a little bit more obvious what we're doing. So we'll say characters.map and take a character, and then we'll say, all right, what should each one of these pieces look like? And we need to join these together back into a single string. So we can either join them with nothing or a new element. And then what does this look like? We'll include a paragraph tag with their ID. So character.id. And then we can do the same thing for their name. The number of coolness points, and their attitude. Cool. In fact, we could probably use this function for any of them. So I'm going to pull this out into a function, and you don't have to have done it this way, called render characters. Takes in a list of characters, and then it's going to return this. Cool. So now I can just call this render characters function with my list of characters, and we're done. Now let's do this for some of the other queries here. Like for the coolness chart, how's my query going to change?
There's a count involved, but I'm not sure how it works.
What you can do is select all from characters.
It starts out with select from characters. How can I make sure that I only get the coolest people at the top? It's Kevin, Dwight, Jim, Michael, in that order.
Order by?
Order by?
Order by coolness, descending.
Yeah. Awesome. I need to just disable the sound on this because it's going to be crazy. So thank you for all of you who had responses. I caught Matt at the end. Order by coolness, points, descending. Now let's make that same one where we only want people with a certain attitude. We're not going to use order by, we're going to use what?
Where attitude equals it would be
Question mark.
param.
And then what goes there is rec.params attitude. Or you could have put that in there directly, but this is a little bit safer overall. Cool. So, just want to take a brief look at this function right here called render characters. Render characters is going to be how we're doing a lot of these type of functions in the future. You might have written it differently, and that's completely fine. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're building towards. So we've got this HTML body, and this kind of looks like an HTML document. In fact, I could write an HTML document, and it gets pretty close. The only part where it changes is this piece in the middle. And this piece in the middle is where I map each piece of my data to a specific view or a partial part of a view, we might say. And if I had more of these, I might want to render them differently. I might say like, oh, I have this piece, and if they weren't all lists of characters, I still might want to keep my HTML and body, and there I could include a headpiece with a title that says the Office DB. Etc. And it looks a lot closer to writing stuff with HTML. And when we get to React, we're going to actually be writing stuff very similar to this, but we want to kind of show you this. Now, all of this code runs on the server. This is an example of server-side rendering, which just means dynamically creating HTML files. There's other languages out there like Handlebars or EJS or Jade that will also do that, but we're just going to be focusing on kind of this custom implementation and to see what some of those templating engines do. And then after we've had a chance to examine that and see how the structure works together, we're also going to look at how client-side rendering works, where instead of all the code that builds the HTML being done on the server side, it's done on the client, and we'll discuss some advantages and disadvantages to both. Cool. So, as an introduction to that, let's look at a way we could do that. So this is going to be inside of 04 server template lunch. Let me go ahead and just
Can you show how that renders in the browser now that
Sure.
you have that all right now?
For sure. Let me just push this up real quick. So let's go ahead and run this. So here's localhost 8080, attitude chart relaxed. Turns out we don't have anyone with an attitude of relaxed. So let's start out with the cast. And so there's each one of them. In fact, if we wanted to change this around, we could add in another level on here. We could be like, let's include instead of just including characters, let's include a whole object of all the properties we want to pass to it called props. So we would say const title and characters is equal to props, and then we could put the title here. And then we could even put it in an H1 in the body. And now let's change this up. So now we're going to have to change the title is going to be cast. And if the characters will still be the same old characters. The title for this one will be coolness chart. The title for this one will be, well, we could even say which attitude that they are. So we could just say rec.params.attitude plus chart, etc. So let's try that out. Let's restart the server. So now there's my cast. Let's go ahead and say coolness chart, or what did we label it here? Coolness dash chart, not underscore chart. And then let's try an attitude chart. / chili. I believe I misspelled this. There we go. There's our chili chart with good friend Kevin up on the top. So with this, we're able to pass these into views, and you might notice that there's some overlap between what all of these are doing. But we're able to sort of keep that out of our routes, out of our, here in this case. So we're starting to separate our concerns where we have a function that just says, hey, I'll handle whatever data you pass to me and I'll make sure that it's put in the correct place. You might think of this as our view model. Our view model just has all the data that the view is going to need, and we'll talk about what all of those terms mean here in just a bit. But any more questions before we proceed? Right on. Let's look at some more examples. Let me just go ahead and add what we were doing. All right. So let's look in 04, server template launch. So if we look at server.js, you'll notice that we have this const views piece. And if we get to the server route, in fact, let's go ahead and run this real quick just so that we can make sure that it runs like we want. So that's going to involve using npm install to make sure that we have all of that we need. We're not using the database in this particular instance because we want to show you this piece by itself, which we would call views. Models, or our data, is responsible in our database, is just responsible for storing what the data looks like. Our views are responsible for showing to the user what it looks like. So we're kind of looking at these in isolation. In the Seinfeld up, we kind of grouped them together, but we want to spend some extra time on the view layer. How can we organize the code that actually builds the HTML when we're doing server-side rendering? So here's our data. Lunches. You could pretend we got it from a database with each call, like we did before, but for now it's just lunches. And if I have a couple different routes that I can visit. So if I go to localhost, it's 3000, 8080, 8080. And I'm on this one. Should be rerunning off of this. Yeah, it just cached it. So I've got 3 different routes I can visit from here. I've got a weekday lunch, which is beet and goat cheese salad with minestrone soup. I've got weekend lunches, which are pizza, 2 double veggie burgers, fries with a big gulp. Sounds like my weekend. And then if I look at all of these, I can actually see, oh, I've got a little bit of an error there. Well, let's go in and fix that and see why that might be the case. So let's start out with this main one. Now you'll notice we say res.send, and this looks like HTML, but we've got this view.app function. View.app, all right, where does that come from? Well, the top level of that is view. Let's look at where view comes from. If we look up here, we can say const view equals require views. Okay, well, if we look here, views is a folder. That's a little bit weird, but we remembered that in Node, if you require a folder, what you're actually requiring is the index.js inside of that folder. So the index.js inside of this folder is actually just a way of grouping together all of these other items in the folder. So app requires app. All lunches is this lunches file, and one lunch is this one lunch file. So because we asked for view app, that would be this one. So we go and look in our app.js file, and we can see that this says, pass me the body that you want to put into this HTML document. This is something we're going to be using on each one of our different pages, where it's just the HTML and it's going to say lunches in the title. And the only thing that's different is going to be what we put in the body. So in our case, if we look at these two side by side, what we're saying is, I would like to embed this string right here. So I'm going to place this string right here and then send that back. So we'll have this completed HTML document. So that's what's just happening at our top level right here. Any questions about this part in particular? This is just about building a string. A string that looks like an HTML document, but it's just building a string. And the nice thing is, we have a special folder for all of those. So they're isolated, they're contained. What does this thing do? It builds HTML for us. Now we can dynamically add some pieces in here, but you'll see with a lot of the other routes that we actually just build other views with them. So in this case, for weekday, we want to keep the main section here. And then we also have one lunch. So we've got app and one lunch. The one lunch view is similarly going to build out a view. Let's go ahead and bring this over here. But it's going to require some special information. So this also receives something called props. It receives an object. One of those properties is going to be named lunch, and we just destructure that, and then we're going to build an H1 with lunch. So for a weekday, we're going to say, all right, app, let's work our way inward and see what happens. So lunch is 0 is this object with a property called lunch that says beet and goat cheese salad with minestrone soup. We're going to pass that data into this one lunch function. This one lunch function is going to return an H1, or a string of an H1 that says beet and goat cheese. Let's put this all in a string. And let's go ahead and text trap this one too. So by passing in this piece of data, we get back this string that says beet and goat cheese salad with minestrone soup. Now, if we passed in this other lunch, it wouldn't say that. It would say pizza, 2 double veggie burgers, fries with a big gulp. So we're able to keep the formatting the same. And we could do things like add a class while changing what the exact details of it are. This string then gets passed to the app function. So the app function receives the body as this, and then it's going to build this whole HTML string based off of that. And so this function is now going to return this HTML document, and that's what we send back to the user. For weekend, we can do the exact same thing, except we're going to be sending different data. So instead of the user getting back beet and cheese salad with minestrone soup, the user is going to get pizza, 2 double veggie burgers, fries with a big gulp, like so. All right. Questions for those pieces? All right. Now, we had lunches for David. We're trying to show off multiple ones, but this has a bug in it. And I'll push up the fix to it in just a second. But let's use this opportunity to try and solve what's going on. So I have this piece of data. When I hit the /lunches route, something is wrong. First thing I'm going to do is visit the lunches route, see what the issue is. So let's see what's happening here. There's no console.log, it's just not behaving like I want. So it says rest.send app, all lunches, eater David foods lunches. So something is going on here with all lunches. The app I've seen working commonly on my other ones. I don't think that's the issue. So let's look at the all lunches function. Now in the all lunches function, this seems to be working a little bit differently. So we've got eater and foods. Let's go ahead and put these two side by side. So eater will be David, that part's working correctly, and foods is lunches. Now, my problem is that lunch, each one of the members of the lunches array is a object. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky because I didn't name these things the same thing. So let's say we rename this to meals, and this should actually be meals.lunch. Or if we kept it the original way, it should be lunch, which feels a little caveman-ish to me personally. I won't say I haven't ever uttered lunch before, but that was our error. We were trying to render out an object. But because of the way we divided it, it was very easy for us to find where the problem was. We could very easily isolate where it was. So we come down here We looked at our route. Our route said, okay, we've got app. That we've seen one, that's fine. All lunches. Okay, let's look at that render function. Oh, okay, the problem has to be in foods.map, where we build a list element for each one of these. You'll notice that whenever we map these different pieces, we make sure to join them together. If we don't, then we're trying to put an array of strings in there, which will put commas in places we don't want. So you always want to, if you have telltale commas, chances are you forgot that step while you were working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and push up the changes we made here. And I want y'all in your groups to explain in the next 10 minutes how these routes work. How are the views, how is the HTML being created when I hit each one of these server templates? What's happening? Where are the views coming from? Where's the HTML coming from? What's the process like? We're going to spend 10 minutes on that, reconvene for any questions after that, before we give you an opportunity to work on it a little bit yourself. Cool. So we'll open up the breakout rooms at this point. Please discuss in your groups what's going on with the different pieces. Ask each other questions. If your group is still stumped, bring them up to us. We'd love to answer it. All right. See ya in 10 minutes. All right, folks, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to have a good lunch. I did. I enjoyed it. Iced tea and a sandwich. So now that we're kind of done talking about lunches in this particular example, I wanted to ask if there were any questions that we could answer to start out with. Let me make sure my volume is working correctly. I always have to double check that. If we're good on that front, then we're going to begin in earnest with an exercise. So for this exercise, what I recommend you do is copy basically everything except the node modules folder from the last example. So you can do that by just holding Shift and clicking on views and then clicking server.js, Control C, select Ben and Jerry's, and paste it in there. Now you'll have copied all the files over into it. You don't have to. You can start from scratch for this next exercise, but it's a good place to start, and then you would just run npm install to get all of your modules. So what are you going to be doing? Well, instead of working with lunches, you're going to be working with ice creams. So we're going to have ice creams, and there's going to be an array of these different ice creams that you can see. Now, we're not using MySQL again for this assignment. We'll reintroduce MySQL pretty soon, but we're not worried about it quite yet. We want to just work with views in isolation. So you're going to have two routes. One is going to be /ice cream /name, the same way that you would have had Star Wars characters or something like that, or the same way that you would have had the coolness chart or something like that. The attitude chart, and then you have an ice creams route, and this is going to display all of them at once. This is the data you're going to use. Let me see here. Let me just run an example for you really quick. We'll be working on this for 20 minutes right at the beginning, and then we'll have a chance to review that, and there will be more of a chance for questions at that point. So localhost 8080 slash ice creams gives us a list of a bunch of different ice creams. And then if I choose a specific flavor, like slash banana, it'll show me that specific flavor. So ice cream slash banana. Or am I just typing things wrong? Ice creams, that works fine. We've got chocolate. Huh. Well, it should just show chocolate at that point. We'll make sure that that's correct when we review it. But that's what we're looking for. We'll be looking at that in 20 minutes. Well, if you have questions, please let us know. We'd love to help you out. Good luck. Alrighty, folks. Let's go ahead and go through this one together. What I've done is copied the not the Ben and Jerry's app, but the server template lunches into the Ben and Jerry's folder to just kind of give us the same starting point. So we've got Express, we're listing on a port. This is going to be replaced with the README. Let me move the README back into its proper place. And this is going to be our data instead. So let's go over to server. And I'm going to say const ice creams equals each one of these. So we can have one of these if we want. So we could say, this will take you to the ice creams route. And from there, you can visit any of the rest of them. That's kind of something you could do, but we didn't strictly ask you to make that as part of the README. The two routes that we did ask for are slash ice cream name and slash ice creams. So let's come back here. So we've got slash ice cream colon name. And then just slash, let's go back to it. And then slash ice creams. So the data that we want to pass into each one of them, well, this one's going to be based off of the name. Let's start with the data, not worry about what we're sending back quite yet.
Hey, Eric, before you continue, can you help I'm not really understanding line 30, how we're grabbing those two values from the view object, the one lunch and the app. I'm not really following that. Could you please explain that some other way?
This is the short way of saying one lunch equals view.oneLunch. And then const app equals view.app. these two do the same thing. So this is looking for a property called app inside of view and a property called onelunch, and then making a variable of the same name that we can use in the rest of the program. So we don't have to say view.app, view.onelunch over and over again. So we don't have to keep saying view elsewhere in there.
Okay, cool.
So the data that we want to send is going to be a specific ice cream within here, and we can do that based off of the name of it. So we can say const flavor equals rec.params, or let's say keep the name the same. Const name equals rec.params.name. That's how we can get what this is. How can I find the appropriate ice cream based off of that?
Can you use a .find method on the array?
Sure. Or a for loop, however you want to do it. Find is one way of doing it. So let's say const flavor equals ice creams dot find. We're going to look at each ice cream, and we're going to say, hey, is your name equal to the name that we got right here? If it matches, it'll return that here, or if none of them match, it's going to return back null. So something that we can do is we can sort of do like what we had up here. We can start out with this, and we could say if there is a flavor, if the flavor is not equal to null or undefined, then we will return the appropriate view. Otherwise, we can just say, let's return back in H1 that says flavor not found. See a list of available ice creams here. And you can see that we're still using view.app, that sort of surrounding HTML that is always the same here again. But we're just passing that in there. Now, if we wanted to, we could absolutely make a view that just did this for us. If we wanted to really take all the view code out of the controller, we're kind of splitting it here just to kind of show you the mechanism of it. Really, you would probably make a view specifically for this. We're just not in this particular case to give you a better idea of how it works. So if the flavor is not equal to null, then we're going to need to have a view which handles that. Now we've got all of these other ones called all lunches and one lunch. And I'm going to rename this. I'm going to say, hey, this one is actually about all ice creams. Or let's say flavors would probably be a better way. All flavors, sure. And we'll also rename this one to be one flavor. Now, Visual Studio Code was prompting me to say, hey, do you want to rename these imports? And I do, because inside of index.js, I now update those, and I'm going to call them all flavors here and one flavor. What is this doing? It's making it so that I have them all organized in one object. So I just need to reference the views object, and then I can have that part of it. The app can still stay the same. We're just going to change the title from lunches to be ice cream town. I don't know. Ice cream village, Baskin Robbins, whatever you want to name it. Cool. So let's run. We need to do a few more things here, including updating each one of these. Let's just start from the beginning. So this is a render function. So what I'm going to do is export a function. That function is going to take something called props. Props is usually an object. Sometimes it's an array, but we usually give it the name props to be like, hey, this is the view model. These are the properties that are the view needs in order to display everything properly. We don't really care how you get this information. Just give us an object with the appropriate information and we'll put it on the page. So it's props. In other languages, you might hear it called a view model. And it's just there to make it easy for the render function to work with. So we're going to return a template string based off of this. Now, when you work with all flavors, it's important to know, or whenever you work with any view, you want to know what the data is going to be. If we look in our server, we'll put these two next to each other. What we want to do for all flavors, which will be down here, oh, that should be ice cream. Let's get rid of these. We've got ice creams colon name and then just ice creams. So all flavor will work with this one. Or no, we'll do single flavor first because that'll complete that one. It'll be pretty, or one flavor. Again, you can be kind of open about the names. So let's continue working on that one function so it works correctly. Cool. So we want to send information about a particular flavor to this property. It's going to be returning something. It's going to be returning a big string that represents a specific flavor. So in this case, we could just say, hey, here's the flavor. Let's look at the data we have to work with. It's probably going to be information about the ice cream, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function one flavor, and I can do that with view.oneFlavor because of how I exported it. That's because I labeled it that way inside of the index.js function. So view one flavor, and let's pass the specific flavor that we found. That's going to, once we have that, we can pass that to view.app, which will put the other pieces around it. And once that's done, we can send that to our front end as a completed piece of HTML. So we're starting with this level. We've just passed in the flavor, and the flavor data looks like this. And so we get to decide what we want. We could say, hey, I want an H1 in here, and that's going to have the theme of it. So I could say props.name or something like that. However, a very, very common pattern is to destructure all the properties you're going to use out of the props at the top. So you would say const name equals props. And this will be if we passed in vanilla, for example. This would be how we got vanilla, and then we can use the template string to just say, hey, here's the name. So that would say vanilla if this was the flavor that we passed in. Beneath that, we can list some other things. We can put up, go ahead.
When you do that find on that array, is it passing into it the actual object in the array, or is it passing in just the name?
It's going to be passing in the actual object, and then we're pulling the name off in particular. So we're getting back this whole object, and this lets us split out the different parts. So we could also say, hey, name, price, and awesomeness.
Okay, thank you.
And that will match up with this. Now, these names need to match. If they don't match, it won't destructure properly. So you need to set them up like this. But we're taking these properties back out of the object, as it were, and using them as variables. So you could even do math in here. It's like, and so you could say it costs and then you could put the $sign literally and then the escape character for price. And then we could say it's got an awesome rating of awesome, and you could even do more complicated queries where you could say like, hey, what's the price per awesome? So we could say that's a value of awesome over price dollars per awesome point. So you can use this data however you want. The thing to remember is that this is always strictly a result of what's passed in here. We don't have any other variables that we're using. If I know the props, I should know exactly what the view should be. So as long as I know the props, I'll know exactly what that is. So let's try this out. Let's visit that on localhost 8080. And let's say slash ice cream slash pistachio. And let's make sure that that route is set up. Yeah, that should be correct. Computer's just taking a really long time for whatever reason.
Eric, do you need awesomeness instead of awesome on lines 6 and 7 on the right hand?
Yes. Let's fix that. Probably just silently failed in that case. Wonder why it's taking so long here.
There's still one more line on 6.
Even better. All right, let's refresh the page. Let's just open this up in a new tab. So it should be sending back an error if that isn't working. If it throws an exception like that. I wonder if I left something else open. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's closed over there. Computers, sometimes they're really slow. While we're figuring this issue out, let's just try node server.js. By itself. Let's just try ice creams by itself. Interesting, because it should be giving me something. So it works with that route. Oh, I didn't save this file. Let's try that again. Slash ice creams slash pistachio. Sorry, ice cream slash pistachio. That's the problem with live demos, right? So let's check this. Slash ice cream, colon name, that matches. We've got a response for each. We're saving it. We were getting responses back from the server. Let's fill in the rest of this while I let that noodle in the back of my brain. So next, instead of sending out one lunch for each one of these, what we want to destructure is one flavor. Or not one flavor, all flavors. Now, if we look at all of our different flavors, we're going to be working with an array of them. So here's our ice creams. Now, something we could do is we could leverage the previous one, but maybe we just want to show an index and then build a link to it. So let's do that. What I want to do is to make some piece of HTML for each one of these. Now, unfortunately, I can't use for each because for each doesn't return something. I need something that gives me back a value. So I'm going to say, pull out specifically, let's see what we send to this route. So we could just send the whole list of ice creams, or we could send it as a prop itself. A lot of times when you're sending an array, you'll actually send an object with an array associated with it. So let's do that. So we'll start out with res.send app, and then inside of app, we're going to put all flavors, and then inside of that, we're going to pass it an object. Let's call it flavors, and that'll be a list of all of my different ice creams. So you can explicitly provide a label for it. You're like, hey, here's the list of flavors. Maybe you even put the date, like, so it's like, hey, here's the flavors as of, today, as of last week, whatever. So I can say const flavors equals props. This will get me this value. And then I'm going to take each ice cream and I'm going to return back a string of some kind based off of the flavor. And then I'm going to join all of that together. So even if I just say, let's go ahead and put the flavor.name there, assuming all of this works, let's go ahead and try restarting our web server. Let's go to localhost 8080/ice creams. Oh, and we have to save that too, don't we? So there's all of them listed out one after another on the page. Now we want to do something a bit better than that. So we're going to say, hey, let's make each one of these a list item. That way they'll be stacked one on top of each other. Cool. And then we could even make them link to the specific page. So we could say, all right, let's make a anchor tag. And their href is going to be equal to, and then we could even put in things dynamically here. So ice cream / and then flavor.name. So we can even work with some dynamic pieces of data right there. So when I click on vanilla, it takes me to the vanilla page. I could go back to one flavor and then give it a back button, for example, where I say, hey, href equals / back, /A. And so now I can have a index take me to the ice creams, and I guess it would be / ice creams here. So I click on chocolate. I know a little bit more about chocolate, and I pull it back. I click on green tea. I know a little bit more about green tea, and I can go back. I'm using the same view functions over and over again so that I can dynamically put information, and it doesn't matter if the user has JavaScript enabled or not. If I look at this page as it comes back from the network, and click on all here. If I look at green tea here, the response I got back just looks like an HTML document. So there's no JavaScript running in the browser to make this happen. It just gets back this file, and it's like I happened to just have that as a static file on my machine. But if I go into this file and let's say I update, let's say that we make, it's COVID, vanilla prices went through the roof. And so I just update this. If I come back here and I go, all right, let's go look at the vanilla page, it'll reflect that. And later we'll hook this up to a database so that that works. So these functions are good for a couple of different reasons. One, it's very easy to reuse them. I don't have to make a specific HTML thing per page, and I don't have to make JavaScript so that they wait until they get the page, and then they wait for the AJAX call, and then they have to wait for the data to come back and load it all in. They just get one complete HTML file from their first request from the word go. Second of all, robots that crawl for search engines. Your page, they just get back an HTML file. They can very clearly see the content of your page. They don't have to simulate a browser or anything like that. They can just go, oh yeah, here's the keywords that people use. Here's all the links. Let me look at all the different links. Let me explore the site so you can get better SEO from that kind of experience. And it also lets us really start to break up these different pieces where we're like, hey, I'd like to use data to more dynamically drive this. And it's relatively easy to see how it's done. My routes, if I'm doing this properly, we've got a few exceptions right here, but if I'm doing it properly, like I'm doing here, the routes don't care. They just know, hey, here's the data. Let's go ahead and sign back in there. Here's the data that I'm passing to the view. That's all I know. Don't care. That's set up. My server-side routes are finished from this point. The backend developers are like, we built your routes. We gave you a place for the views. You can modify the views to be whatever you want. Here's the data that you're getting from the database or from anywhere else. You could be reading it in from a file, etc. And having it in a views folder means, oh, I know exactly where the JavaScript is for this. I come to this route, I see /ice creams, I see it has the all flavors. I go to views, there's a file labeled all flavors. That's controlling what that page looks like. That's controlling what that page looks like. It's really easy to start navigating as our files get larger and larger. And that's why we have this index set up, so it makes it easier to use all of those different pieces. So any questions? React has the idea of, when we get to it, of components and functional components that look very, very similar to this. So if you've heard about React functional components, maybe you've been reading blog posts and seen anything like that, they work very similarly to this. It's a little bit different because they're not using template strings. They're using something called JSX, but the fundamental idea is there, and they work on the client, not on the server, so they can also do some client-side stuff. Now at this point, our pages are pretty static. We don't have anything that's happening on the client. Once the HTML gets there, it's kind of stuck at this point. But we're going to learn techniques that can help us with that. So what we want you to do for this next section is we're going to actually start you out with some different views. So we've got, hey, this is the setup for the views function. We've got an index.js, which already exports app, dog, all animals. We're sort of getting similar to the example we just went through. We've got, oh, that shouldn't be in there. I'll make sure I push that up real quick. First of all, let me go ahead and push this solution up. Next, inside of 06, let me make sure that all right, so just make sure you do a git pull. You'll have the solution we just went through, and then you'll have that quick fix that I had to add to that one. So the README is going to have you taking some data. And in this case, if you look inside of the server, we've got some animals, similar to how we had with different ice creams and stuff like that, except this is different data, clearly. And we have a couple of routes already set up for you. Hey, this is the dog route. This is the all pets route. This is the all non-pets route. And so what we want you to do, using sort of the instructions embedded in the activity, is to complete the app. By the end, it should look like, and let me pull that up for you really quick. By the end, it'll look very similar to the ice creams function. If you finish early, you can work on some styling and different stuff like that. And again, this doesn't use SQL. We'll get to that, but this doesn't use SQL yet. It's just hard-coded because we're focusing on the view part of it right now. So if I visit localhost 8080, /dog, it should take me to this route, which will then return information about the dog. Let me make sure that that's set up correctly. Okay, just got it set up wrong here. Well, won't take any more time of yours on that piece right now. We'll be going through and building that together, but it'll be the same sort of thing you saw with the ice cream flavors and the ice cream, where you'll see, hey, here's information about the dog. And then you have the two other routes, which are pets and non-pets. And you'll want to put in some of the information there. So we're going to open up the breakout rooms at this point. Let us know if you have any questions along the way. We're going to work on this for 20 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us over that period, and as well, we'll be going over it afterwards and looking at that as well. Cool. Good luck. Alrighty, folks. It looks like everyone's piling back in. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this one. The first thing I want to do is in our views for dog.js, you might just say, all right, I'm going to just output some static HTML, see how I want it to look. So when someone comes to the VRoute, what do they see? Well, they might see an H1 and it says dog at the top. And some of the other things I might say is like, hey, that's the type. And then I might put in a paragraph tab and say this animal is a pet. And then this animal is very, or not very, fierce. Now that's that. Doesn't use any of our data, doesn't use any of our props as we are commonly labeling it. So if we go to index.js, we can see that it's exported on the dog object. So we can get access to this function by requiring views and then asking for the dog object. So in our server, we already have views imported up here. So let's just start out with res.send views.dog by itself. So let's go ahead and start this up. And let's actually do that in the solved version, which will be the version that I push up. And let's grab what we did to dog in there. So right now, pretty hard-coded. Pretty hard-coded for us. So let's go ahead and move into the solve folder, make sure everything is installed, and then start it up. During office hours, we'll be talking more about, hey, how could we build this from scratch? What are some workflows you might go through in order to build the different HTML as you're working on it, etc. So if you're interested in that, make sure to stick around for it. There we are. So on localhost, let's go to localhost 8080/dog, and we get this animal is a pet. This animal is not very fierce. So we get some information about it. Now what we might want to do is do some different things here. So you might want to say this animal is a pet, true. This animal is not very fierce, or this animal has a fierceness rating. And often that's cool and all. But we also don't want to necessarily put a ton of view logic in here. So we could set this up either from the data that we pass in directly, or we might make our view model change. Let's do it where we keep the view really dumb, because the ideal is to keep the view really dumb. Sure, there might be some conditionals in there, but in fact, let's look at that. But you'd never want to do a lot of logic in your view. Your view should mostly be, hey, here's the value that we got from the view model. So let's go look at our server and let's think about what data we can pass into it. Let me make sure these are all the correct ones. I want to make sure we're using the right view and not the unsolved one. Yeah, that's the unsolved one, which we don't want. So there's our server, there's our view. So I'm going to show you how you can do some of the stuff in the view, but most of the time you want to build this sort of in your view model level. So we've got this data here. I'm going to relabel it to props. And I might say like dog. Well, what I'm going to say that I need a animal type here. So I'm going to say I'm expecting to receive an animal type from props. I'm also expecting to see if it's a pet or not. We'll call that is pet. And we'll give it a fierceness score out of 10. This is just a way that you can relabel pet to be is pet. So it takes out the pet value and relabels it to be is pet. Again, we'll be looking at that more during office hours. So dog is going to get replaced with what?
Animal type.
Animal type.
Animal type. This animal is a pet. In this case, we're going to do a little bit of different stuff based off of the ternary operator, based off of the conditional operator, our good old friend with the question mark and the colon. So we're going to give back different answers depending on whether they are a pet. So if this animal is a pet, that's our condition. Then we're going to say, well, if they're a pet, then this animal is a pet, is not a pet. We can put the conditional logic here if we want to. And sometimes you're going to need conditional logic in the view, but this is often, you don't want to get too complex with it a lot of the time. You don't want your view to be computing a lot. Your view is just about, hey, here's the data. It's really easy if you know exactly what the data is to predict what will be on the page. Again, we can do the same thing here. This animal is, and then we can figure out which one we want to use. I'm going to actually change the formatting a little bit on there. This animal, fierceness, out of 10, what would you say an animal needs to be in order to be fierce?
7 or above.
7 or above. If it's just a 6, that's just feisty. So if the fierceness is greater than 7, we'll say is quite fierce. Otherwise, we'll say is manageable. Oh, I've got is twice. So is quite fierce, manageable. So let's try that. So currently, we're not passing information to it here, and that it doesn't particularly care how we give it to it. We could say literally animal type, dog, pet, true, fierceness, let's say 5, and it will happily render out the dog view there. The dog is a pet, the animal is manageable. If I change this to be false and change the animal type to be cat, or let's say lion, and change the fierceness to be 10, it'll update everything accordingly. Now, a lot of times people might pull this logic back out and they might say, you know what, I'm just going to put the text as the thing. So we might make it like pet text, or is fierce, or is manageable, and then just put the value directly in there. But sometimes you'll see conditionals like this, where it says, hey, it's one of these or the others. So that's something to be aware of. However, with dog, we actually know exactly what that should be. That should be the first element of the animals array. So let's pull that out here. So I'm going to say const dog equals animals. And this is an example of array destructuring, which we've seen before. This takes the first element, whatever it is, and just labels it dog. And then we can say, all right, return views dog. Now, this is a hard-coded route. I'm sure you can see the applications where we could change this to be just a generic animal name, but we're not worried about that for this particular exercise. That wasn't part of the assignment. Now, let's look at all pets. Let's take a look at all pets and see how that works. So we'll go over to all animals. I'm going to move this over here. And again, you might just start out writing the HTML for what you want it to look like. So we might say, okay, here's a list of all of my animals. Like so. And I want to show them. So let's assume that I am working with all of my pets. Let's start out with, or just an animal. The thing that we want to say is, hey, here's for a particular list item, we'll put in an H2 at the top, which is the name. Let's go with dog again. We might have a P tag, whether they're a pet or not. And then we might have their fierceness rating, for example. Fierceness, and I believe we have dogs, are at a 4. And then we might also include on here cats, or a cat. Let's say pet true, and the fierceness we'll say is a 10. So this is what we want our HTML to look like, but we see repeating elements. And when we see repeating elements, what's the technique we've seen so far to handle that?
Make it a function.
Yeah, we'll have a map function that takes our data and then translates it into something else. Now we could also just make this a function. If you needed a helper function like this, like function, let's say that it would be, what do we want to name it? Render animal item. And then we would take in an animal as input. You could do something like this, where you would say, all right, instead of what I want here, I'm just going to call render animal item. And that would work as well. Let's make sure that that's tied into all pets. So let's say, let's just give it all animals for right now. So we'll say res.send views dot all animals. We'll need to make some changes to this in the future. But let's go visit the all pets route. Now, this is currently hard-coded to just be dog and cat. Now, what we want to do is for each one of these animals that gets passed in, and you'll notice we've just passed it in as an array. You could also say, I'm going to pass in animals so that I can say props and specifically get the animals out to make it a little bit more explicit. Either one works and is fine. This is just a common way of labeling it. That way it's very easy to see explicitly what you're passing in. So let's go ahead and we'll say, hey, for each one of my animals, I'm going to take that animal and render the animal item. And then since that produces strings, I'll join all of that together. That works great, except currently render animal item only outputs dog. Let's see. View all animals. Oh, didn't save the server. It's dog every time, which I imagine in, Doug from Up is very excited about that, but we're a little bit less so. So we're going to change this, and we can again treat this just like, hey, this is props to the render animal item, and it's like a smaller helper function. So we're going to be able to take out the animal type. We're going to be able to take out the pet. We're going to be able to take out the fierceness and just input those where we want. Oh yeah, and this equals props. Don't want to forget that part. So now, dog. It's pretty great. There's each one of my animals, but this is my all pets route. And some of these definitively aren't pets. Giraffes, zebras, lions, Tiger King aside, some of these aren't pets. So where should we fix this?
Before you do the response.send and views.app.
Before we send this, we should just give this view different data. It's not the data's or the view's job to know what to display and what not to display or what should be included. So we're going to say animals is equal to animals.filter. Let's only take the animals where they're a pet. So we're going to filter out everyone who's not a pet. And guess what? We kind of get non-pets for free by just putting a little not symbol in front of it. So now we've got two routes. This will only show my dog and my cat. And if I say all, I believe it's non-pets, I'm using the same view function for different routes. I'm just putting in different data. So I have all of this reuse that I'm able to do. Now, if we look at the response, this isn't the best formed HTML. Yeah, because we're just returning this. Sure, I got the HTML body in here, but if I look in my network request, refresh the page and take a look at all non-pets, I actually just get back this UL. I don't get back everything else. Chrome is putting that in there. So if I wanted to have custom fonts, custom styling, anything like that I wanted to include, wouldn't work. But all of these have a piece in common. They're pretty much all going to have the same title, header, etc., which is why we have app.js here. It's going to handle any of these pieces. I don't know why it says task saver there. Let's go ahead and change that to say animal website. And so what I'm going to do is before I send it back, I'm going to first send this to view.app. View.app is kind of our layout file. It's there to just help us know what to nest the rest of it in. And let me make sure I've counted the number of these correctly. There we go. And this kind of highlights what we would use here. And again, we would say views.app. Tab this over a little bit, helps us keep everything clean so we can see kind of the levels that it's being embedded in. And we would do that here as well. Cool. So now it includes the proper parts. We could even in here include some things like a style. And we would say like a class is .pet. The color will be blue if it's not a pet. We can say color red, something like that, and then we can use that in our other views, which are built in here. So if I go into all animals, for example, inside this function, I can say, all right, if there's a pet here, so let's say if it's pet, we're going to add in class equals, or we'll say, what did I label that again? Pet and not pet. Class equals, if it's a pet, we're going to say pet. If it's not a pet, we're going to say not pet. So there's all of these red ones now, and then if I go to all of my pets, they show up in blue, so you can do other things like that. And we'll show that off more tomorrow and a little bit more during office hours. We'll be kind of reviewing this view thing. The main thing I want you to take away is, hey, we can start to really take our HTML, how we build our HTML, and separate it from the rest of what's going on. From the rest of what's going on in our server. We're starting to be able to divide up our functionality a little bit, and we'll learn some bigger patterns about that. Right now, we're focusing on the views. We went quite over into office hours, so I'll be extending office hours a little bit. Any questions? Cool. We're going to take 2 or 3 minutes to get office hours set up. Since I ran so late, we'll just extend office hours another 10 minutes or so, so that if you have questions, we'll be able to answer those. But we'll be back in 2 to 3 minutes after we finish getting everything set up. You can do one-on-ones with the TAs, etc. And we'll see you then. All right. How's it going, folks? I want to start office hours with a little bit of a straw poll, which is what's the best bubbled water? I try out a bunch of different ones. LaCroix is the current front runner, but I've tried out a whole bunch. If you have one, you're like, hey, you have to try this kind of water in a can or water in a bottle that's got bubbles or, whispers of flavor to it. I'd love to know in Slack if y'all have any suggestions. That's a personal one. That's just for me. That's not part of office hours. Or you can let me know here. Either way.
Always between Waterloo and LaCroix.
Yeah, they're both good. I've tried. It has
Bubble.
big in the name. I'm trying to remember what it is. Bubble's all right.
Yeah.
Wait, are bubble or bubbly?
I think we mean the same one. It's the, like it has the like U that's like the font that where the U kind of just looks like a bowl basically.
And on the tab it says hi you.
Yeah, which I appreciate. I kind of like being greeted by small objects. Like I'm that person. That's okay.
I just tried. It was white peach and nectar, and whatever chemical they put in there, it's really good.
It's always fun. They're like, there's just chemists out there. They're like, but what is raspberry though? Like, what is it? And I'm sure they get it down to a science. It's important work. All right.
Agreed.
Cool. So office hours. First of all, I wanted to open it up for just any questions over what we covered today. Was there any section you saw that you're like, hey, you kind of lost me at that point? I'd like to look at that one in more detail. Or any, if not, then we can just go into more examples.
Can we start from the beginning?
Sure. So let's use the one we just, let's actually go back to a simpler one. Let's go to Ben and Jerry's, for example. Let's look at the solved version of that. So our server is here, and we've worked with servers enough that I'm not, stop me if that's not the case, but I'm pretty comfortable with servers or where most of the class seems to be with them. Nevertheless, let's just go through it. So we've got our server. Our server is set up here. This is the port. So this is how other programs can talk to the server through port 8080. We're going to skip past a lot of this, and we're just going to minimize it into thinking about what is our server. I've got the wrong server open. I want Ben and Jerry's open. There we go. So the way I like to think of the server is a series of routes, a collection of routes, a collection of things I can ask happen somewhere. Especially if I'm thinking about it as a front-end developer. This is the interface for the rest of the world to interact with this. If you send a request to the host that it's listening on this port, you will talk to the server. And the server will give you a response. It'll either give you, if you use one of these routes, it'll give you the appropriate response. Or if it gives you one of these routes that don't match this, it'll just give you back a, hey, I can't do what you're asking me response, kind of the equivalent of a shrug. I don't have a route for what you're asking me to do. So in these are all what we might in one of our old servers call an HTML route, and that they're responsible for returning stuff directly to the browser. They're not data for JavaScript to manipulate, they're an HTML page directly for the browser to look at. So let's start out with our slash route. This is the first place we see view.app. Now, res.send we've seen before. In fact, if we took off the view.app, this wouldn't be that dissimilar from what we'd seen before. Like, hey, just res.send some HTML, some static HTML. And then that's where this gets a little bit more confusing, is when we incorporate the views. So let's go ahead and make sure that, let's run this server as we go through it. So let's go ahead, open in terminal, there we go. And let's visit localhost 8000 or 8080. Cool. Now, this isn't perfect because even though Chrome can compensate for it, in our network, on our network, let's refresh the page. If we look at what localhost sends us, it's just an H1 and an A tag. That's by no means a complete HTML document. we want to send one back, but pretty much all of our HTML documents are going to have that part on the inside. This is what's different about it from the other ones. This is the contents of this is what's different, and that's what we're sending back. So what we did is we built a function called app.js, which says, hey, you always have this on the outside. You always have this on the outside. Again, I'm opening up the wrong one. Let's views app.js. They're very similar. You always have this on the outside. It's going to look like this. This is where you're going to put your jQuery links or your Bootstrap CSS or anything else. These are at the beginning of any of your pages. The only thing that's different is what's in here, so why write that over and over and over again? So instead, just give me the part that's different, and I'll give you the part that's the same, and you'll have the complete output afterwards. So by saying, we could say const full HTML equals views.app, and then this is what gets put in between there. So you can think of it as it's almost like injecting that into there. So this H1 gets placed where this marker is, because that's the body that we're giving to it. And then we can send back this full HTML. And you'll notice when we do, when we refresh the page, we're going to get the title. Oh, we're going to get an error. So I import it as view. That's just a typo in there. So you'll notice it changes to Ice Cream Town. And if I look at what I get back, you'll see that I'm getting back all of the HTML pieces in there as well. So any questions about this section so far? We'll take off the preserve log piece of it. Another piece that might give you pause is you see require views, and views isn't a file. Views is a folder, right? So what gives? Well, when you require views, you're actually requiring views/index.js. It'll, just like if you have a folder and you look at the folder, it'll try and load in index.html. The designer of Node decided it would be cute to do the same thing, and people have done it. This isn't necessarily a recommendation to do it that way, but this is more so that you're aware that people do it, so that when you see it, you're aware of it. So inside of our index.js, basically what we're doing here is grouping together all of the other pieces. We're going to export something called app. What is that? Well, it's the function definition inside of app.js. We're going to export something called all flavors. Well, what is that? Well, it's the function definition inside of all flavors, etc. So let's close this. And you can kind of see all the pieces at play here at once. We get a slash route. We build our HTML. This gets copied into here. The resulting string gets stored in full HTML, and we send it back. Topo Chico for life. I like it. Cool, so let's continue. Let's look at some more things that we can do. So that's great for just this page by itself. In fact, let's go ahead and change it back to kind of the more compressed format, where we just embedded view.app in there. So we didn't have to make a whole separate thing for it. Let's look at that with ice cream : name. So in this case, if we look at one flavor, which is what we're displaying right here, we've mapped it to this. We can see that one flavor expects these fields to be passed to it. It's expecting an object with a name property, a price property, an awesomeness property. That's one reason we like to do this destructuring at the top, because it's very easy to look at the file and know, what does this file need? What does this file need? Oh, it's this list up at the top of the different pieces that I need, which is one reason we like to destructure at the top rather than piecing through all the HTML, especially as the thing gets huge, to know what it should look like. Again, the view model, the view props shouldn't be that smart. You don't want anything complicated like a that has methods and objects and things like that. Just an object with simple properties on it, or maybe a couple, or an array or two in there. Usually what you want for working with these views. Now, you might have a very big one with a lot of different levels, but usually you'll have broken that up into separate parts so that each part can deal with different sections. So one flavor says, give me a flavor. So the route right here, which we'll learn later, we're working more with something called a controller. The view is not responsible for getting the data. The view is just responsible for turning the data into the HTML for the browser to see. So the route says, okay, based off of the name, I'm going to see if I have a flavor by that name, and then I'm going to pass that in to the list here. So this flavor is going to be, and if we look at our ice creams, we can see that, hey, guess what? The name, price, and awesomeness match up with what we got here. If it didn't, you can manually work it that way. So for example, we expected name, price, and we said, how awesome. You can't just pass that in directly anymore, but you could make some small adjustments. So you could come in here and say, well, I've got something that kind of matches, but I'm going to say, all right, it's flavor, all the properties of flavor, except we're also going to add in how awesome is equal to flavor.awesomeness. So you can just manually pass in the object you want. And this is object destructuring. This is just a way to copy over all the top level properties. So this says, hey, all the other parts of flavor, just put them in there. So this is a way to do a simple copy through object destructuring. But in our case, or you could do it the more drawn out way, but I'm trying to show you a lot of the ways that you're going to see it as you're working with more modern code. The ones that you see should already be familiar based off of you working with objects previously. Now, sometimes people won't even bother with this repetition. They won't be like, all right, here's a function and here's props, and then I'll pass each in. They'll do the destructuring right up here at the top. So they'll say, hey, this object that you pass, it's going to have a property called name. It's going to have a property called price. It's going to be called have a property called awesome. Why would I bother with naming props if I'm just going to destructure it immediately? So that's another thing that can happen as well. So we have this flavor. That one flavor creates this HTML. As a result, all of that is placed inside of the app.js and is sent back to the user. Now we also handle the case, if we couldn't find it, where we say res.stat, and then we could say res.status 404, and then send back this, hey, we couldn't find them. Here's a list of all your ice creams, etc. Now, let's look at the ice creams one, because this is neat because it lets us work with arrays. And we're going to say, hey, I want to render a bunch of different stuff. We're going to label that as flavors because our view model expects it to be that way. Now, could they have just passed in an array directly and worked on it? Yeah, but I like to always pass things in as props. Just makes it easier and more to label. So let's take a walk through how this one works. So we destructure out these flavor things. So we're not saying view dot, view dot, view dot over and over again. We can just say all flavors or app if you want. And we pass in flavors, which is just all of our ice creams. But we're labeling this array as flavors. So in here, we can reference it as flavors, which can help us out. Now in this place, we want to turn each one of our flavors into a string that represents that flavor. And so what we do is we use the map function. The map function is all about taking something and transforming it into something else based off of its initial properties. Now this won't actually modify the flavors array the way we've written it. This is dynamically creating another array of strings that we join together. And the reason we do that, let's in fact take that off. Let's go visit the flavors page. You'll notice how there's a comma in between each one of those. That's because here we returned an array of strings. When you call toString on an array of strings, it just puts them one after another with commas in between. We don't want the comma, so instead we're going to say, you know, that array of strings, just join them together with an empty string. Or you could join them together with a new line if you want, and that will just put them one after another, and that will get rid of the commas. Later in React, we'll see that we don't have to do the join, but that's because React works fairly differently, though it looks on a surface level similar. So for each flavor, we're going to return a string. We're even going to set some of the properties dynamically because, again, this is just a string that we're making. So we're setting the ice cream to be the flavor name, and then we have the flavor name visible there as well. So we're, in a sense, not writing the HTML pages ourselves like we would have to handcraft them maybe for project one if we wanted the data to be there over and over again. We're teaching the computer to write the HTML for us. And we're doing it on the server side. And because we're doing it on the server side, that means crafting the whole HTML string. We're not running any JavaScript on the client to modify stuff. We'll look at that more later this week, how to do that with client-side rendering, but we're working with our servers right now, so we're sending it all out. Now, you can do both. You can have a mix of server-side and client-side rendering. Most projects tend to favor one over the other rather than mixing the two, but it's possible to do both. And you'll see that in some of our later examples, we'll still be using client-side JavaScript. We'll just ship what it looks like at the beginning, and then our client-side JavaScript will allow us to change it once the page is loaded. So that builds all of those together. It puts them in between the UL tags, and then we take that, we pass it into the app, and then we send that to our front end where it arrives as just one completed HTML file. And that's the essence of what we're doing, is we're just building a string. It feels kind of complicated because we're using a lot of different data to dynamically do it, and we're trying to make it kind of look like we're building it out of HTML in an HTML-like structure. But ultimately, we're just stitching pieces of a string together. Questions? Alrighty. So, didn't hear any questions. I always want to check my volume just to make sure that's the case. Let's move on to some of the stuff we were doing in animal render functions. And actually, let's build up some different pieces here. So we might have, sometimes as things grow more and more, and you might want to see stuff in more locations. Let's say that on our main page, we want to have a flavor that we highlight randomly for the user. We say, hey, here's a random flavor for you. How would we do that? Well, we already have some of this that's built, or if we look at the one flavor, this already has some of what we want. It has a lot of what we want, where we just see this portion. And so we can start out by just copy pasting it. I always like to say, if you're just copying and pasting twice or see it in two places, that's not too bad. It's when you start seeing it in 3 or 4 different places that you need to start thinking about whether you should abstract it. So let's go back to my main view for my get route. On here, I also want to include a random flavor. Random flavor. So I'm going to write myself a function, one of which will allow me to pick something randomly. So function, we'll call it pick one, and it's going to take an array, and it's going to return array, and the member is going to be math.random times array.length. But of course that needs to be an integer. So we're going to use math.floor. So I'm going to say const random flavor equals pick one from ice creams. And so now we'll put in here welcome H2, and then we want to include a random thing on here. Maybe we make these H2s. So I copy all of this over. And I could say, yeah, I want to put all of this here. That means, of course, I have to destructure the flavor and all of that. And so I'm already having to do a bunch of extra work. It's getting kind of hard to put all of this on here. So I would say const name price awesomeness and now when I visit my page, yeah, one there. All right. So now if I visit my home page, the server doesn't work because I didn't turn it back on, or it crashed. Name price awesomeness equals random flavor. There we go. Welcome, pistachio. So it'll tell me one. Let's see if it picks pistachio every time. Nope, just got lucky those first couple of times. Vanilla. It's given me one of these. But I want this to kind of look the same. I might say like, hey, if I make changes to how this looks, some style changes, I want that to be reflected here too. I want to have the same view. So I'm going to make a new one, and we'll just call it flavor details.js. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to add it into my index, so it's really easy to find. Give it the same name, not because I have to, but because it makes it way less confusing when people try and use it. Follow my same module.exports is equal to a function that takes in props and returns a string. Flavor detail goes here. So I'm going to take some of this, just pop this in and say, all right, you should pass this along. Now, in one flavor, I have a lot of stuff that's like that, but not everything. For example, this back button. I don't want that to be on the home page. There is no back that it needs to use. So I want to be able to use each one of these. I might even put this in a special folder, call it like partials or something like that, just to help say, hey, this isn't meant to be a full page by itself. This is a piece you can use, and then update that inside of my index.js so people can find it there, or even say, hey, here's a list of partials, and one of those partials is flavor details. However you want to organize that, that's not the real point I'm going for at this point. But that's how you might see it organized. So I want to pick a view out of this, and I want to use it in these two different locations. So I'm going to say, let's say const flavor details equals require views dot partials, or / views. Let's see. Oh, we're in flavor details. Well, that would be inside of one flavor, which would actually, you could just require partials it directly if you wanted to. / views / partials if you wanted, or let's just say / partials / flavor details. We'll do it just directly. That's the simplest way to do it here. Then I just call flavor details with all the relevant information. So I could just literally copy all of this over if I wanted to. And that would just render in the same place. And then if I want to do that here as well, I could put that right here. And then I could just say const. We'll do some advanced destructuring here for details. Partial equals views. Partials. I'd have to look at what I labeled that. Index.js partials, yeah. I'm trying to remember. It's partials. There we go. So we're just doing some crazier destructuring there. Could you also just have written it as const flavor details equals views.partials? Yes, but I'm also trying to expose you to more and more destructuring because you'll see a lot of it out there in public code or in other projects you might work on in the future or other reference material. So the more you can get comfortable with destructuring, it's becoming more and more popular as a way to write code, the easier it'll be for you. Now let's make sure everything is running. Excellent. Views is not defined. I bet I named it view again. I always forget whether I labeled it, let's see, in the name. Price and awesomeness. Those are all there. I bet that's in flavor details. Yeah, didn't break it apart. All right. There we go. Jawbreakers, etc. for each one of these. And the reason you might like this is because you might do some style changes to the details. You might be working on the details here and go, you know what? This isn't the prettiest thing in the world. So I'm going to add in some styles here. Let's close the server. So maybe you say, let's say class equals flavor item. Or, well, let's just call it flavor details. And then let's go over to another file here. Let's make a new folder. Let's call it public. And inside of public, let's make a new file called style.css. Inside of style.css, we'll have .flavor details as a class. Inside of our server, we'll make sure that we can use that by saying app.use express .static public. And then in our app view, we'll put a link there so that they all have it. Link type equals style sheet, or no, relation equals style sheet. href equals dots or equals style dot css. And let's start with that, having that work easily by inside of my styles. I'll just say the color of the text is blue. This is just to make sure that we've got everything hooked up correctly. Cool. And now it happens here. And on this page as well, it looks like we didn't pass things through correctly. Let's check all flavors. Or sorry, one flavor. Name, price, and awesomeness. Let's check here inside of our route. Make sure it got sent to the right place. Got sent there in there as a flavor. So we'll actually change how we're doing that. There you go. So you can change things either on one end or the other. So we could just do some small styles here, say like background color, gray, padding, 20 pixels, margin 0, auto, width, let's say 500 pixels. text align center. Let's change that gray to be a lighter gray. Let's see. Yeah, that's still not that enough. Let's see. What I like to call screaming gray. And now we changed it for one of them. And let's go to the home page. And we changed it for that one too. It's in the same place. We just added a class, we added a style, and now it's not just here, it's everywhere else that we want to stick this item has been updated in this way as well. Maybe we notice, hey, on this one, it goes to too many decimal places. We want that to just drop off after 2 decimal places, no matter where it is. The way you used to have to do it is you might have to fix it in 2 places where you figured that out. So, but now I can go into flavor details and just take this number and I will say dot to fixed to, and now it says $1.36 for awesome points, $2 per awesome point, 1.40. And if I look at some of these other ones, they'll also be limited in that particular way. So we're starting to be able to think about pieces of our HTML as components, as these isolated pieces where we can just say, hey, here's the style and here's the format with it. And we'll see with React when we get to client-side rendering, we can even think about the actions and the state that belongs to them in that particular way. Now, this is a pretty static website, all told. There's not a lot of client-side, there's no client-side JavaScript, in fact, going on here, which might complicate things a little bit. But later we're going to see when we switch over to client-side rendering that you can, or later we'll see you can still make it work with that. And as we move forward, we're going to be switching over more and more to client-side rendering, where these techniques are still helpful. Because again, you're just building a string. And whether you're building the string on the client or the server, you're still building a string and then saying, hey, this is what my HTML looks like. So these techniques transfer, which is one of the reasons that we like to teach you this rather than a template engine, and it looks a lot like the way React does things.
Can I see the index.js real quick for the one where it's linking all the files? Okay, I was just seeing how you did the partials thing real quick.
Yeah, it's just another object.
Okay.
It's all just being loaded from different places. And you might not do that. You might put it on the same level. It just depends on how you want to organize things. Like this is up to you. And another thing you could do is you could actually say like, hey, I don't like having to write app in front of these over and over again. So you could actually say, and this will be the last little thing I add, hey, instead of writing all flavors, what if I just took the thing that was in all flavors, let's say, and said, all flavors is actually its own function, which is going to take in whatever it would before. And it's going to return the results of calling, yeah, let's switch this around a little bit. So let's say const app equals this. And all flavors is actually going to say, and so we'll just put app in there directly. No need to say there. And we'll say, hey, you could just call app on, let's say const all equals require. This one is where it gets the weirdest looking, and I'm trying to decide how weird to make it look. Like this, which means that when you're calling all flavors, you're really calling the all flavors function with app built into it. It might be a little bit easier if I did it this way. So when someone calls the all flavors functions from the index, they're actually getting app built in. You could do that. And then you would change the corresponding way you call it in here so that you don't have to say res.send app all flavors. You just say, hey, here's the view I want to use. And that has it already built in. So you could do that too. And you might see some stuff built that way. We didn't do it in our example because that's a little bit trickier, and I wanted to limit the amount of trickiness we experienced during the class. And so we wouldn't have as much to deal with. During office hours, I'll allow us to get a little bit looser with that kind of stuff, but not so much during class itself. But yeah, code's crazy, y'all. Any other questions? Alrighty. If there's no more questions, then I'm going to shut down office hours for today. We'll get that recording posted for you so you can review anything we went over today. If you have further questions, you can bring them tomorrow morning to office hours. We'd be more than happy to answer them then. In the meantime, I would say if you want something to practice tonight, redoing the Ben and Jerry's exercise, redoing the animal renders function exercise can really help you get a handle on what's going on. If those are feeling kind of challenging, you might just look at the server's template lunch to start out with and try and go through each piece and describe what's going on. What I would do is draw it out and almost like you had to explain to another person what was going on as you went through each line. What's this line doing? What's this line doing? Or comment out the code. So as ways to sort of get started interacting with what you see here. Cool. Have a lovely evening, y'all. It was wonderful seeing y'all today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.
Have a good one.